Malcolm Washington stared in disbelief as Secret Service agents encircled him and Zoe. They'd been pulled aside at airport security just moments ago, victims of what they thought was racial profiling. Now these federal agents were calling them heroes. Everything was about to change forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to see more unbelievable true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Let me know if you've ever experienced discrimination while traveling. Your story matters. The morning had started with such promise. Malcolm Washington adjusted his necktie in the hallway mirror of their elegant Buckhead home, while Zoe finished packing the last of her sundresses. After 5 years of marriage, they were finally taking the anniversary trip they'd postponed 3 times due to their demanding careers. "Did you remember to pack your sunscreen? You know how you burn," Zoe called from the bedroom, folding a wide-brimmed hat into her carry-on. Malcolm smiled. At 34, he'd established himself as one of Atlanta's most respected cardiothoracic surgeons. His wife Zoe, 2 years his junior, had recently made partner at her law firm specializing in corporate litigation. They were the definition of a power couple, brilliant, successful, and finally carving out time for themselves after years of relentless work. "Got it along with those ridiculous swim trunks you insisted I buy," Malcolm replied, patting his suitcase. "I still think neon green isn't my color. Trust me, you'll thank me when we're on that white sand beach in Barbados." Zoe laughed, wheeling her luggage into the hallway. Her dark skin glowed with excitement, hair styled in elegant box braids for their tropical getaway. The drive to Atlanta International Airport was smooth, their conversation filled with plans for snorkeling, sunset dinners, and sleeping late. Luxuries neither had enjoyed in months. Malcolm had spent weeks researching the perfect resort, wanting everything to be flawless for their belated celebration. At the first-class check-in counter, a young attendant with a name tag reading Rebecca greeted them with professional courtesy, efficiently processing their documents for their direct flight to Bridgetown. Malcolm noticed a few subtle glances from white travelers in line, the kind of looks he'd grown accustomed to throughout his life and career. The silent question times. Do they really belong in first-class times? He pushed the thought aside, determined not to let anything dampen their spirits. "Your boarding passes, Dr. and Mrs. Washington. You'll be boarding at gate D14 in approximately 90 minutes. Enjoy the first-class lounge while you wait," Rebecca said, handing over their documents with a smile. Malcolm nodded appreciatively, taking Zoe's hand as they made their way towards security. The terminal bustled with morning travelers, business people rushing to meetings, families herding, excited children solo adventurers with backpacks and dreams. When they reached the security checkpoint, Malcolm instinctively began removing his shoes, belt, and watch, placing them in the plastic bin alongside his laptop. The routine was familiar. He'd flown countless times for medical conferences. Zoe did the same, placing her designer handbag on the conveyor belt. "Excuse me, sir, ma'am. I need you to step aside for additional screening," a TSA agent said, approaching them with a stern expression. His badge read Roland Peterson. Something in his tone immediately set Malcolm on edge. "Is there a problem?" Zoe asked, professional courtesy in her voice, the same tone Malcolm had heard her use in preliminary court proceedings. "Random screening. Please follow me," Peterson replied, gesturing to a separate lane. Malcolm glanced around, noting several white passengers breezing through the main security line with minimal scrutiny. A businessman with rumpled clothes walked through the metal detector without a second glance from security. A college-aged woman with a bulging backpack passed through with nothing more than a cursory check. For the next 20 minutes, Malcolm and Zoe endured what felt like a performance designed to humiliate. Peterson emptied the contents of Zoe's carefully packed handbag onto a metal table, rifling through her personal items with unnecessary thoroughness. Malcolm was subjected to multiple passes of the metal detecting wand, despite the scanner showing no alerts. "Sir, can you explain why you're traveling to Barbados?" Peterson asked, scrutinizing Malcolm's passport. "It's our 5th wedding anniversary," Malcolm replied, evenly maintaining his composure while anger simmered beneath. His father's warnings echoed in his mind. A black man showing anger to authority figures could have dangerous consequences. Even with his medical credentials, even in his designer suit, he remained conscious of how quickly situations could escalate. And you both maintain residences at the same address. Peterson continued looking between their IDs with exaggerated suspicion. Yes, we're married, as our matching last names and wedding rings might suggest, Zoe replied, professional demeanor beginning to crack under the absurdity of the questioning. There seems to be an irregularity with your documentation, Peterson announced, holding their passports at arm's length as though they might be forgeries. The boarding announcement for their flight echoed through the terminal. First call for their direct flight to Bridgetown. Malcolm checked his watch, anxiety building. They'd arrived with plenty of time, but this random screening was threatening to derail their carefully planned vacation before it even began. What irregularity? Zoe asked, legal mind already cataloging every violation of protocol occurring in this interaction. Our passports are current, our visas are in order. What specifically concerns you? Peterson's expression hardened. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job, ensuring the safety of all passengers. If you continue to be uncooperative, we'll need to take this to a private screening room. Malcolm placed a gentle hand on his wife's arm, feeling her tension. They'd been through versions of this before. At upscale restaurants, when hosts attempted to seat them near kitchens, despite reservations at hospital galas. When Malcolm was mistaken for waitstaff, despite his tuxedo. The familiar dance of proving they belonged in spaces others assumed they didn't. We're happy to cooperate, Malcolm said calmly, but our flight leaves soon and we've provided all necessary documentation. The second boarding call for their flight reverberated through the terminal as Peterson summoned his supervisor. Security Supervisor Wesley Hammond approached with the swagger of a man who enjoyed his modest authority a little too much. His neatly pressed uniform and rigid posture suggested military background, but his immediate dismissive glance at Malcolm and Zoe revealed biases no service training had corrected. What seems to be the problem here? Hammond asked, addressing Peterson while barely acknowledging the Washingtons. Possible documentation irregularities, sir. The passengers claim to be traveling to Barbados for an anniversary trip. Peterson reported, emphasizing claim as though their marriage was theoretical rather than legal fact. Hammond took their passports, flipping through pages with exaggerated scrutiny. These could be high-quality forgeries. We've been alerted to watch for fraudulent documents, especially on international routes. Zoe's legal training kicked into high gear. Excuse me, but what specific aspects of our documentation appear fraudulent? Both passports were issued by the proper authorities and contain all security features. My husband is a cardiothoracic surgeon at Emory University Hospital, and I'm an attorney with Blackwell and Schmidt. Our credentials can be easily verified. Hammond's expression flickered with something between surprise and skepticism. Ma'am, criminals come in all occupations. Your claimed professions don't exempt you from security protocols. The word claimed ignited something in Malcolm's memory. A similar dismissal during his second year of residency when a patient had refused to believe he was a doctor despite his white coat and hospital ID. The patient had demanded a real doctor, and the attending physician, a white man 20 years Malcolm's senior, had to intervene. Even after graduating top of his class at Johns Hopkins and completing one of the most competitive surgical residencies in the country, Malcolm still encountered people who questioned his credentials based solely on his skin color. If you doubt our professions, you can call Emory Hospital and ask for Dr. Malcolm Washington's office. My assistant can verify my identity. Malcolm offered his voice level despite the frustration building in his chest. That won't be necessary, Hammond dismissed. We have our procedures. Zoe reached for her phone. I'm going to record this interaction for documentation purposes, she stated, professional but firm. Hammond's face hardened. Recording is prohibited in secure areas. I'll have to confiscate your device if you attempt to record security personnel. Actually, TSA regulations permit passengers to record interactions as long as it doesn't interfere with screening procedures or capture the monitoring screens. I can cite the specific policy if you'd like, Zoe countered, lawyer mode fully activated. A young black woman standing nearby in the security line had been watching the interaction unfold with growing concern. She stepped slightly closer, making eye contact with Zoe, in silent solidarity. "Is there anything I can do to help?" the woman asked quietly. Her name tag identified her as Layla Johnson, likely returning from a business trip based on her professional attire. Hammond turned sharply. "Ma'am, return to your place in line immediately, or you'll also be detained for interfering with security procedures." "Detained?" Malcolm questioned. "We aren't being detained, are we? We're voluntarily cooperating with additional screening." The supervisor's choice of words had shifted the interaction from inconvenient to potentially serious. Zoe's legal mind was already categorizing the mounting violations of procedure. A uniformed airport police officer approached, drawn by the escalating tension. His nameplate read Thomas Reed. "Everything under control here?" Officer Reed asked, hand resting casually near his weapon in a way that immediately made Malcolm tense. "We've got possible documentation issues with these two," Hammond reported. "Possible fraudulent identity claims." Reed gave the Washingtons a once-over, his gaze lingering on Malcolm's expensive watch and Zoe's designer handbag. "Traveling internationally. To Barbados. For our anniversary," Malcolm repeated, growing weary of having to justify their existence in this space. While the officer questioned them, Malcolm noticed a nervous-looking white man in his mid-40s being processed through the adjacent security lane. Something about his behavior caught Malcolm's surgical attention. The micro-expressions of anxiety that Malcolm had learned to identify in patients hiding symptoms or medical history. The man's eyes darted repeatedly to the exit signs. His fingers tapped an irregular pattern against his thigh, and despite the cool air conditioning, sweat beaded at his temples. More concerning, the TSA agent checking this man's documents was giving him only the most cursory glance before waving him through. The contrast was stark. Malcolm and Zoe subjected to intense scrutiny while this visibly anxious passenger received minimal attention. As the man hurried away, Malcolm noticed him drop something small near a trash bin. Possibly accidental, possibly intentional. The object skidded partially under a bench. "Excuse me, officer," Malcolm interrupted. "That man just dropped something suspicious by the seating area. Given his nervous behavior, it might be worth checking." Reed barely glanced in the direction Malcolm indicated. "Sir, please focus on answering our questions. We'll determine what's suspicious." The final boarding call for their flight to Bridgetown echoed through the terminal as Hammond made a decision. Take them to Secondary Screening Room 3 for additional questioning and document verification. As they were escorted away, Malcolm caught a final glimpse of the suspicious man disappearing toward the international gates and the small package still partially visible beneath the bench. Something felt dangerously wrong, but his immediate concern was the increasingly serious situation he and Zoe were facing. Their anniversary trip was unraveling, and they hadn't even made it past security. Secondary Screening Room 3 resembled an interrogation chamber more than an airport security area. A metal table bolted to the floor dominated the space, flanked by uncomfortable plastic chairs. A security camera with a blinking red light monitored the room from the upper corner. "This is absolutely unnecessary," Zoe stated as they were left alone in the room. "We should call Jefferson. He handles civil rights violations for the firm." Jefferson Zong was Zoe's colleague who specialized in discrimination cases and had successfully litigated against multiple government agencies. Malcolm nodded, reaching for his phone, only to remember it had been confiscated along with their carry-ons. "They took our phones," Malcolm reminded her, checking his watch. Their flight had almost certainly departed without them. 5 years of marriage postponed by demanding careers and their celebration derailed by the same discrimination they'd faced throughout their professional lives. But Malcolm couldn't shake the image of the nervous passenger. Throughout his medical career, Malcolm had developed an instinct for trouble. The slight changes in a patient's vitals before a major complication, the subtle indicators that a surgery wasn't proceeding as expected. That same instinct was screaming now, and it had nothing to do with their current detention. "Something's not right about that man I saw," Malcolm said, quietly leaning closer to Zoe. "The way security just waved him through while putting us through this, and he dropped something suspicious." Zoe's expression shifted from anger to concern. She trusted Malcolm's judgment implicitly. Before she could respond, they heard voices outside the door. "Just keep them busy for another 30 minutes until the flight's gone. Then tell them it was a document verification issue that's been resolved." Hammond's voice carried through the door. "They can rebook tomorrow if they want to make a fuss." The voices moved away, leaving Malcolm and Zoe in stunned silence. "They're deliberately making us miss our flight," Zoe whispered incredulously. "This is textbook discrimination." Malcolm's attention shifted to the security camera. Following his gaze, Zoe subtly assessed the room, her legal mind calculating angles and blind spots. After 5 years of marriage, they could communicate volumes without words. Zoe stood suddenly. "I need to use the restroom immediately," she announced loudly. "It's an urgent female matter." Malcolm suppressed a smile at her tactical approach. Within moments, a female security officer entered the room. "Ma'am, you'll need to wait until your screening is complete," the officer stated. Zoe put on a masterful performance of distress, something Malcolm had seen her use effectively in difficult negotiations. "Officer, unless you want a biohazard situation in your screening room, I suggest you escort me to the nearest restroom. I'm having a feminine emergency that won't wait for bureaucracy." The officer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but I'll need to accompany you." Of course, Zoe agreed, making eye contact with Malcolm as she was escorted out. The message was clear: create a distraction. As soon as the door closed, Malcolm moved to the security camera's blind spot. Years of precision movements in surgical theaters had given him exceptional awareness of spatial relationships. He quickly assessed the room's second exit, likely a staff door connecting to adjacent screening areas. Malcolm knocked loudly on the main door. When a male officer opened it, Malcolm put on his most professionally concerned expression. "Sir, I think my wife is having a medical emergency. As a doctor, I need to check on her immediately. She has a history of vasovagal syncope under stress." The medical terminology confused the officer just enough to create hesitation. "Wait here, I'll check." "There's no time," Malcolm interrupted with the authoritative tone he used in operating rooms. "She could lose consciousness and sustain a head injury. As medical personnel, you could be liable for preventing appropriate care." The strategic mention of liability worked. The officer stepped aside momentarily, allowing Malcolm to move into the hallway. In the ensuing confusion of radio calls and uncertainty about protocol, Malcolm slipped away toward the main terminal. His medical badge from Emory Hospital, which security had overlooked, helped him navigate back through employee areas with confident nods to staff. Within minutes, he emerged near the main concourse, scanning the crowds for the suspicious man. The international departure gates swarmed with travelers. Malcolm moved purposefully, a skill he developed as a black professional man in predominantly white spaces. Move with clear intention or risk being questioned. His height gave him an advantage as he surveyed the terminal. There, near Gate C-34, the nervous man from security was pacing near a crowded gate where a flight to London was boarding. Gregory Malcolm caught the name from the boarding pass the man was fidgeting with, was behaving even more erratically now, his hands shaking as he manipulated something inside his carry-on bag. Malcolm observed from a distance, noting the man's increasingly agitated movements. When Gregory pulled out what appeared to be an electronic device unlike any standard phone or tablet, Malcolm's concern deepened. The man appeared to be activating something, fingers trembling as they moved across the surface of the device. In that moment, Malcolm faced a profound moral dilemma. The same security system that had just discriminated against him and his wife might not believe his warning. He could walk away, find Zoe, and deal with the injustice they'd experienced through proper legal channels. No one would blame him for turning his back on a system that had shown such disregard for his dignity. But if his suspicions were correct, lives were at stake. The Hippocratic oath he'd taken years ago echoed in his mind. First, do no harm. Sometimes, doing no harm meant taking action when others wouldn't. Malcolm made his decision and moved toward Gate C-34. Malcolm navigated through the bustling terminal, keeping Gregory in his sightline while maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. Years of dealing with institutional racism had taught him painful lessons about when to stand out and when to blend in. Right now, blending in was crucial. As he followed, memories flooded back unbidden. The first time he was called a racial slur in elementary school. The high school guidance counselor who suggested trade school despite his perfect GPA. The patient who requested a different doctor despite Malcolm's stellar credentials. The security guard who followed him through an upscale store while he shopped for Zoe's engagement ring. Each memory reinforced the question pounding in his mind. Why put yourself at risk for a system that doesn't value you? What would you do in Malcolm's situation? Would you risk your safety to save others who might never do the same for you? Comment number 1 if you believe Malcolm should find security despite his treatment, or number 2 if he should protect himself and walk away. This decision could change everything in the next few moments. Like this video if you've ever had to make a difficult choice between personal safety and doing what's right. Subscribe to hear stories of courage in the face of injustice every week on our channel. How far would you go to save others when the system has failed you? Ahead, Malcolm spotted 2 airport security officers chatting near a coffee kiosk. His instinct was to approach them, explain what he'd seen. But would they listen to him? Or would they see his rushed approach as threatening, especially after he'd left the screening room without authorization? Before he could decide, Gregory suddenly changed direction, veering into a men's restroom near gate C-34. The London flight was in final boarding stages, passengers forming a line that stretched past the restroom entrance. Malcolm hesitated only briefly before following. Inside the restroom was crowded with travelers, making last-minute stops before boarding. Gregory had chosen the handicapped stall at the far end, the door locked as Malcolm entered. Through the gap beneath the stall door, Malcolm could see Gregory removing items from his bag and assembling something with trembling hands. The metallic click of components fitting together sent a chill down Malcolm's spine. This was no ordinary electronic device. Malcolm needed to act immediately. He moved to the sink, deliberately dropping his wallet with a loud clatter that echoed through the tiled space. As expected, the noise drew attention from all occupants, including Gregory, who paused his activities. Greg Schultz Malcolm called out with convincing recognition in his voice. "Is that you in there? It's Malcolm from the conference last year." The movements in the stall stopped completely. After a tense moment, Gregory responded hesitantly. "I think you have the wrong person. Minneapolis Medical Symposium. You presented on emergency response protocols." Malcolm continued improvising a plausible connection. "We spoke during the reception." The stall door opened slightly, Gregory peering through the crack with suspicious eyes. Malcolm caught a glimpse of what appeared to be wiring inside the stall. "I really think you're mistaken," Gregory said, tension evident in his voice. Malcolm maintained his friendly demeanor while positioning himself closer to the stall. "My mistake then. You look exactly like him. Flying to London today." "Look, I'm in a hurry," Gregory responded, agitation increasing. The door opened wider as he attempted to intimidate Malcolm into leaving. That wider opening gave Malcolm a clear view of what could only be described as an improvised explosive device partially assembled on the toilet tank. His surgical training kicked in. Stay calm, assess the situation, act decisively. "You know what, I think I made a mistake." "Sorry to bother you," Malcolm said, appearing to back away while actually calculating his next move. Gregory relaxed slightly, turning back toward his deadly project. In that moment of distraction, Malcolm noticed something else. A distinctive bulge at Gregory's waistband. Concealed weapon. Making a split-second decision, Malcolm pretended to stumble intentionally, bumping against Gregory while appearing to lose his balance. "Sorry, must have slipped on some water." The momentary physical contact allowed Malcolm to identify exactly where the weapon was positioned. It also gave him the element of surprise when he executed his next move. Using knowledge of human anatomy honed through years of surgical precision, Malcolm struck a precise pressure point at the juncture of Gregory's neck and shoulder, the brachial plexus region that, when compressed correctly, could temporarily incapacitate without permanent injury. Gregory gasped, his right arm going momentarily numb from the pressure. Before he could recover, Malcolm had already twisted the man's left arm behind his back, effectively immobilizing him against the stall partition. "Help security," Malcolm shouted to the startled restroom occupants. "This man has a bomb." Chaos erupted as passengers fled the restroom, shouting warnings. Gregory fought back with surprising strength, managing to reach toward his concealed weapon with his partially functioning right hand. Malcolm kicked the stall door shut, confining their struggle to the narrow space and preventing Gregory from gaining leverage. The impact knocked the partially assembled device to the floor, components scattering. "You have no idea what you're doing," Gregory hissed, eyes wild with a combination of fear and hatred. "They need to be stopped. All of them." "Who needs to be stopped?" Malcolm demanded, maintaining his hold despite Gregory's resistance. "The globalists. The elites." "This flight is just the beginning," Gregory spat. "Let me go or you'll regret it." Malcolm tightened his grip, using his body weight to pin Gregory more securely. "The only thing I'd regret is letting you hurt innocent people." With his free hand, Gregory finally managed to reach his weapon. Not a gun, as Malcolm had feared, but a tactical knife with a serrated edge. He slashed backward the blade, grazing Malcolm's forearm. Pain seared through Malcolm's arm, but his surgical experience with high-stress situations kept him focused. Blood began soaking his shirt sleeve as he adjusted his hold, targeting another pressure point that sent excruciating pain through Gregory's wrist, causing him to drop the knife. The bathroom door burst open as airport security officers responded to the commotion. "Freeze hands where we can see them," they shouted, weapons drawn. "He has a bomb," Malcolm explained urgently. "Components on the floor. He was assembling it in the stall." For a terrifying moment, Malcolm realized how this might appear. A black man restraining a white man claiming terrorism. Would they believe him? Or would their biases lead to a tragic misunderstanding? "Get on the ground, both of you," the officers ordered. Malcolm complied immediately, releasing Gregory and laying face down on the bathroom floor, hands visible. The device components are scattered under the handicap stall. He's armed with a knife. "Please check the stall carefully." As security officers cautiously approached, Gregory made one last desperate move, lunging for a component that had slid near the sink. One officer tackled him, while another secured the scattered device parts. "He's telling the truth," the second officer confirmed after examining the components. "Call the bomb squad, now." As Malcolm was handcuffed, standard procedure until his story could be verified, he wondered where Zoe was and if she was safe. Despite the pain in his arm and the indignity of being detained after preventing a potential attack, one thought brought him comfort. He'd done what was right, regardless of how the system had treated him. It was a choice he would make again, without hesitation. Zoe Washington had not become one of Atlanta's most formidable corporate attorneys by accepting no for an answer. After being escorted to the restroom under supervision, she'd managed to convince a junior security officer named Kevin to review the surveillance footage from the main terminal. "Look there," Zoe pointed at the screen, showing Malcolm's interaction with the suspicious passenger. "My husband noticed that man acting strangely and dropping something. He tried to alert your colleagues, but they dismissed him." Kevin frowned, zooming in on the footage. "That does look unusual. The passenger seems extremely agitated. My husband is a surgeon who specializes in identifying subtle physical indicators of distress. If he was concerned enough to mention it, there's likely cause for alarm." Zoe explained her professional demeanor, masking her growing anxiety about Malcolm's whereabouts. Kevin hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the compelling evidence before him. "I should report this to my supervisor." "Your supervisor is the one who detained us without cause while letting that suspicious individual through security with minimal screening," Zoe countered. "I need to find my husband immediately. Either assist me, or I'll be documenting your name alongside the others in our civil rights complaint." The mention of legal consequences shifted Kevin's calculation visibly. "I can't officially release you without authorization. Then unofficially step aside while you review this concerning footage," Zoe suggested, already moving toward the door. "You'd be performing your actual security duty by investigating a legitimate threat." Kevin didn't stop her as she left the room, though she knew she had minutes at most before Hammond discovered her absence. Without her phone or belongings, Zoe moved purposefully through the terminal, her legal mind rapidly assessing options. The airport intercom suddenly crackled to life. "Attention all passengers, security personnel are responding to a situation near gate C34. Please avoid this area and follow staff directions. This is not a drill." Zoe's heart dropped. Gate C34 was in the international terminal. If Malcolm had followed his instincts about the suspicious passenger, he might be directly involved in whatever was unfolding. She quickened her pace, moving against the flow of passengers being directed away from the area. Security personnel were establishing perimeters, evacuating nearby gates. Zoe caught fragments of alarmed conversations from fleeing travelers. Someone said bomb. They've got a guy in custody. Security tackled someone in the bathroom. With each step, Zoe's anxiety intensified. She scanned the chaotic scene for any glimpse of Malcolm, but security officers blocked her path as she approached the cordoned area. "Ma'am, you need to evacuate this terminal immediately," a stern-faced officer instructed. "My husband might be involved in this situation," Zoe explained, trying to maintain her composure. "Dr. Malcolm Washington. He may have been the one to alert security." The officer's expression didn't change. "All civilians need to clear the area, no exceptions." Was a black man in his 30s involved in the incident? Zoe pressed lawyer mode, fully engaged despite her personal stake, approximately 6'2", wearing a navy suit. "Ma'am, I don't have that information." "You need to evacuate now," the officer repeated more forcefully. Zoe recognized the familiar pattern. Her urgent concerns dismissed her questions unanswered. The same discriminatory treatment they'd faced at the security checkpoint was now preventing her from discovering if Malcolm was safe. She strategically retreated, circling around to approach from a different angle. Near a service entrance, Zoe spotted a frightened gate agent huddled with colleagues, all watching the unfolding situation. "Excuse me," Zoe approached, focusing on a young Latina woman whose name tag read, Jessica Rivera. "I'm trying to find my husband. He may have been involved in alerting security to a threat." Jessica looked up, her expression sympathetic rather than dismissive. "Are you talking about the tall black man in the navy suit? The one who stopped the bomber?" Zoe's breath caught. "Yes, Malcolm Washington. Is he okay? Where is he?" "Security has him detained near the incident site. I overheard them saying he intervened and prevented something terrible, but they're treating him like he might be involved," Jessica explained in a hushed tone. "It doesn't seem right. He's bleeding." The word bleeding sent ice through Zoe's veins. "I need to get to him. I'm his wife and an attorney." Jessica hesitated only briefly before making a decision. "Follow me. I can get you closer through the staff corridors. Security isn't letting anyone through the main concourse." Jessica led Zoe through a series of employee-only passages, using her access badge at several checkpoints. "My brother was racially profiled at a traffic stop last year," she explained quietly as they navigated the back hallways. "The officer wouldn't even call the number he gave them to verify his identity. I know what it's like when the system doesn't listen." They emerged near gate C32, close enough to see the commotion at C34 without being immediately stopped by the outer perimeter security. Through the glass partition separating the gates, Zoe could see Malcolm sitting on a bench handcuffed while medical personnel attended to his bleeding arm. "Thank you," Zoe told Jessica with genuine gratitude. "I can take it from here." Drawing on every ounce of professional authority she'd cultivated throughout her legal career, Zoe approached the nearest security checkpoint. "I'm attorney Zoe Washington of Blackwell and Schmidt, and that is my husband, Dr. Malcolm Washington, who appears to be detained despite preventing what I understand to be a terrorist attack. I demand immediate access to my client." The security officer blinked in surprise at her authoritative tone. "Ma'am, this is an active security situation, and you are potentially violating my husband's civil rights and denying medical consent procedures by preventing his wife, who is also his attorney, from accessing him," Zoe interrupted. "I can cite specific statutes if necessary. or we can handle this reasonably." Her unwavering confidence created just enough hesitation for a higher-ranking officer to notice the exchange and approach. "What's the situation here?" "Lieutenant, I'm Attorney Washington. My husband, Dr. Washington, appears to have prevented a security threat and is now being detained and denied proper medical attention. I'm requesting immediate access as both his spouse and legal counsel." The lieutenant assessed Zoe for a moment, then nodded. "I'll escort you, but this is still an active scene. The FBI has been called in." As they approached, Malcolm looked up and saw Zoe. Despite his handcuffed position and bandaged arm relief washed over his face, the connection between them transcended the chaos surrounding them. Zoe rushed to his side, immediately examining his injured arm. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I'm okay," Malcolm assured her. "Just a cut. They've bandaged it already." The lieutenant stood nearby as Zoe lowered her voice. "They have you handcuffed after you prevented an attack." Malcolm nodded slightly. "Standard procedure until they verify my story. But Zoe, that man was assembling a bomb in the restroom. If I hadn't followed him—" "Excuse me," a new voice interrupted. A woman in a dark suit approached, showing FBI credentials. "I'm Agent Diane Foster. We need to speak with Dr. Washington immediately. My husband requires medical attention for his injury, and as his attorney, I'll be present for any questioning," Zoe stated firmly. Agent Foster's eyebrows raised slightly. "Your husband is being hailed as a hero by witnesses, Mrs. Washington. We're not treating him as a suspect." "That's not how your security personnel are handling the situation," Zoe pointed out, gesturing to Malcolm's handcuffs. Foster turned to the lieutenant. "Remove those immediately. Dr. Washington prevented a potential catastrophe today." As the handcuffs were removed, Malcolm rubbed his wrists, sharing a knowing look with Zoe. They'd both experienced enough instances of differential treatment to remain cautious despite the apparent change in tone. "Can someone explain why we were detained and subjected to discriminatory screening by TSA while the actual threat walked through security unchallenged?" Zoe asked, addressing her question to Agent Foster rather than the airport security personnel. Before Foster could respond, a commotion near the security perimeter drew everyone's attention. The original TSA agents who had detained Malcolm and Zoe, Peterson and Hammond, were approaching their expressions, shifting from self-importance to shock as they recognized the Washingtons at the center of the security incident. Those passengers were in secondary screening. They left without authorization, Hammond announced, apparently unaware of what had transpired. Agent Foster turned to him with a cold stare. "These passengers are Dr. Malcolm Washington, who just prevented a terrorist attack that your security measures failed to detect, and his wife, Attorney Zoe Washington." Hammond's face paled as the implications set in. Peterson looked equally unsettled as he realized their discriminatory treatment had nearly resulted in disaster. "We were simply following protocol for suspicious documentation," Peterson attempted weakly. While allowing an actual security threat to pass through with minimal scrutiny, Zoe noted pointedly, "I believe that will be relevant to the official investigation." As if on cue, more federal agents arrived at the scene, among them individuals with the distinct bearing of Secret Service. The presence of these elite security personnel confused everyone present, including Agent Foster. Agent Foster, one of the new arrivals, addressed her directly. "We need to brief you immediately on the significance of this incident. The target wasn't the London flight." Foster moved aside to confer with the Secret Service agents, leaving Malcolm and Zoe momentarily alone amidst the chaos they'd never anticipated when they'd set out for a simple anniversary trip that morning. "You followed him," Zoe said, quietly taking Malcolm's uninjured hand in hers. "Even after how they treated us, you still did the right thing." Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. "I couldn't live with myself if something happened and I'd done nothing. But I never expected this level of response." As they watched the serious expressions of the federal agents in conference, they both sensed that their ordeal was far from over, and that the full truth of what Malcolm had prevented was still unfolding. The FBI command center had been hastily established in an airport conference room. Video screens displayed security footage while agents coordinated with local law enforcement and federal agencies. At the center of this controlled chaos sat Malcolm and Zoe Washington, still processing the dramatic shift in how they were being treated. Agent Foster entered with a tablet containing preliminary reports. "Dr. Washington, we've completed our initial assessment of the device components. If assembled, it would have been a sophisticated explosive capable of causing catastrophic damage. The bomb squad is calling your intervention providential." Malcolm nodded solemnly. The surgeon in him had recognized the life or death stakes in that bathroom, but hearing the confirmation still sent chills down his spine. What about the suspect? Zoe asked her attorney's mind, focused on building a complete picture of the situation. "Gregory Schultz, age 46. We've identified connections to a domestic terror cell that's been on multiple watch lists," Foster explained. "His electronic devices have revealed communications with at least 3 other individuals who we're now tracking." "So he wasn't acting alone," Malcolm observed. "No, and based on materials found in his possession, this appears to have been one part of a coordinated plot," Foster confirmed. "We're still piecing together the full scope." The conference room door opened as an airport security technician entered with a laptop. "Agent Foster, we've isolated the security footage you requested." Foster nodded. "Play it for us, please." The main screen displayed Malcolm and Zoe's arrival at the security checkpoint, followed by their extended detention, while Gregory Schultz passed through an adjacent lane with minimal scrutiny. The contrast was stark and undeniable. "This is textbook racial profiling," Foster stated bluntly, surprising both Washingtons with her candor. While highly educated professionals were subjected to extended detention based on nothing but apparent bias, an actual threat walked through, virtually unchecked. The door opened again, and the original TSA officers entered, accompanied by Airport Director Franklin Pierce. Their body language had transformed entirely. Peterson looked downright terrified, while Hammond maintained a stiff formality that barely masked his discomfort. Dr. and Mrs. Washington Pierce began with practiced smoothness on behalf of Atlanta International Airport. "I want to express our deepest apologies for your experience today. There appears to have been a serious lapse in our security protocols." "A lapse," Zoe repeated, legal precision kicking in. "Director Pierce, what we experienced was blatant discrimination. Your officers detained us without cause, while allowing an actual security threat to pass through with minimal screening. That's not a lapse. It's a failure of both training and fundamental respect." Pierce cleared his throat. "We'll be conducting a thorough internal investigation, which we'll be monitoring closely," Foster interjected. "This incident has exposed serious vulnerabilities in your security procedures." Peterson stepped forward awkwardly. "We were just following procedure for suspicious documentation." Malcolm fixed him with a steady gaze. "What specifically was suspicious about our documentation?" "Our passports are current, our identification verified. The only thing suspicious was the color of our skin." Peterson had no response, his gaze dropping to the floor. Hammond attempted a different approach. "In today's security environment, we're trained to look for certain indicators. Like successful black professionals traveling first class for their anniversary," Zoe interrupted her, tone precise and cutting. "Because that's who you detained, while missing actual indicators of threat from Mr. Schultz." The awkward silence that followed was broken by a commotion outside the conference room. Through the glass walls, they could see more Secret Service agents arriving, creating a security perimeter in the adjacent area. Foster's phone buzzed. After a brief conversation, she turned to the group with a startled expression. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, there's been a significant development. The President is arriving at this airport within the hour for an unscheduled diplomatic meeting. The South Terminal is being secured as we speak." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt in the room. Pierce's face drained of color as the implications became clear. "Are you saying?" Malcolm began connecting the dots. Foster nodded grimly. "Based on materials found in Schultz's possession and preliminary electronic forensics, it appears the London flight was not the primary target. The actual target was the presidential motorcade route, which would have passed directly beneath the terminal section where Schultz was positioning himself. The room fell silent as the true stakes of Malcolm's intervention became clear. He hadn't just prevented an attack on a flight. He had potentially thwarted an assassination attempt. "My God," Zoe whispered, reaching for Malcolm's hand. Another Secret Service agent entered the room, introducing himself as Agent Daniel Cooper, Presidential Protection Detail. "Dr. Washington, we've been briefed on your actions today. You've rendered an incalculable service to this country." The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Just hours earlier, Malcolm and Zoe had been treated as suspicious, unwelcome, and potentially criminal. Now, federal agents were regarding Malcolm with something approaching reverence. Peterson and Hammond shifted uncomfortably as their mistreatment of the Washingtons took on an even more damning dimension. They hadn't just racially profiled innocent travelers. They had detained the very person who would prevent a presidential assassination attempt while allowing the actual threat to proceed unhindered. "We'd like to transfer you to a more secure location for debriefing," Agent Cooper continued, "and the White House has been notified of the situation." As they were escorted from the conference room, Malcolm noticed media vans arriving outside the airport. News of the incident was spreading, though the presidential connection remained secure for now. Director Pierce hurried alongside them. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, I want to assure you that the airport is prepared to make this right. We can offer compensation for your missed flight vouchers for future travel." Director Pierce. Zoe interrupted, her attorney voice in full effect. "We're not interested in vouchers. We're interested in systemic change. This isn't about our inconvenience. It's about a security system that focuses on the wrong threats because of ingrained bias." As they walked, Zoe's legal assistant texted her. Somehow, news of their involvement had already reached her firm. The message contained a preliminary search on TSA Supervisor Hammond, 3 previous civil complaints alleging racial discrimination, all settled quietly with no disciplinary action. Zoe showed the message to Malcolm, their eyes meeting in silent communication. This wasn't just about their experience anymore. It was about a pattern that put everyone at risk when security resources focused on bias rather than actual threats. As they were escorted to a secure vehicle, media cameras captured their exit. Without context, the footage of a distinguished-looking black couple being escorted by Secret Service agents created immediate speculation online. Within the secure vehicle, Agent Cooper spoke directly. "Dr. Washington, the President has expressed a desire to thank you personally once the diplomatic meeting concludes. A representative from the White House will be joining us shortly to coordinate." Malcolm and Zoe exchanged glances, processing this extraordinary development. Their anniversary trip to Barbados had transformed into something neither could have imagined when they'd packed their suitcases that morning. "We'll need some time to discuss this," Malcolm responded carefully. Despite the dramatic shift in how they were being treated, he and Zoe both recognized the potential political dimensions of what was unfolding. As the secure vehicle pulled away from the airport, Malcolm's injured arm throbbed, a reminder of the very real danger he had confronted. Yet his mind was already moving beyond the physical threat to the larger issues this incident had exposed. Their private anniversary celebration had unexpectedly thrust them onto a national stage. The question now was how they would use this unprecedented platform. The secure facility where Malcolm and Zoe were taken resembled a high-end corporate office rather than a government building designed to maintain a low profile. Inside a comfortable conference room, they were joined by Agent Foster, Agent Cooper, and a new arrival, Eliza Thornton, Deputy White House Communications Director. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington, thank you for your patience during this extraordinary situation." Thornton began her crisp efficiency, suggesting years of crisis management experience. "The President has been fully briefed on today's events, and specifically Dr. Washington's heroic actions." Malcolm shook his head slightly. "I did what anyone would do after noticing suspicious behavior." "With respect, Doctor, most people would not have pursued a potential threat after being mistreated by the very security system they were trying to help," Cooper interjected. "Especially not with the precision you demonstrated in neutralizing Schultz." Zoe, who had been quietly observing the dynamics in the room, finally spoke. Miss Thornton, while we appreciate the recognition of my husband's actions, we're concerned about the larger issues this incident has exposed. Thornton nodded with practiced diplomacy. The racial profiling aspects have not gone unnoticed by the administration. The president considers this an opportunity to address security reform. Reform requires acknowledgement of the problem, Zoe noted. The officers who detained us are already attempting to rewrite the narrative of their involvement. As if on cue, Agent Foster's tablet chimed with an alert. She scanned the screen with a frown before turning it toward the group. A local news channel was running, breaking coverage of the airport incident, featuring an interview with TSA Supervisor Hammond. We identified suspicious behavior and initiated standard protocols, Hammond was saying to a reporter, his story already evolving. Our officers' vigilance created the security environment that ultimately led to the threat being neutralized. That's blatantly false, Malcolm said quietly, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. They dismissed my concerns about Schultz while detaining us for suspicious documentation that had no issues whatsoever. Thornton assessed the situation with political calculation. The narrative is already forming. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to meet privately with the president after his diplomatic engagement concludes. This would not be a public appearance, but rather a chance for him to express personal gratitude. Malcolm and Zoe exchanged a look perfected through years of partnership, a silent conversation in a glance. Miss Thornton, Zoe began, we appreciate the offer, but we have concerns about a private meeting that might be used to manage this story rather than address the underlying issues. The president is genuinely concerned about the security failures this incident has revealed, Thornton assured them. Then the president should be equally concerned about the discriminatory treatment that almost prevented my husband from stopping this attack, Zoe countered. If we meet, we want assurances that TSA training and accountability will be specifically addressed. Foster's tablet chimed again. You're going to want to see this, she said, turning the screen toward them once more. Airport Director Pierce was now on camera, standing beside a different set of security personnel than those who had detained the Washingtons. Our dedicated officers worked closely with Dr. Washington to identify and neutralize the threat he claimed, completely rewriting history in real time. Malcolm shook his head in disbelief. They were erasing what actually happened. This is why documentation and accountability are crucial, Zoe stated firmly. The same system that failed today will continue failing unless structural changes are implemented. Cooper's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he addressed the group. The president's diplomatic meeting is concluding ahead of schedule. He's requested to meet Dr. and Mrs. Washington at the secure location within the hour. Thornton immediately shifted into preparation mode. We should discuss talking points. Miss Thornton, Malcolm interrupted politely but firmly. My wife and I need a few minutes alone before we decide how to proceed. The officials exchanged glances before nodding in agreement. Of course. We'll be just outside when you're ready, Thornton replied as they exited the room. When the door closed, Malcolm turned to Zoe, his expression troubled. They want to control this narrative, make it about heroism rather than the discrimination that almost prevented me from stopping the attack. Zoe nodded, legal mind, assessing all angles. They're offering recognition without accountability. The question is whether we can leverage this platform to create actual change. What do you think? Malcolm asked, trusting his wife's strategic thinking as much as her moral compass. Zoe considered the question carefully. I think we've been handed an unprecedented opportunity. The administration needs a positive story here. They can't afford to have headlines about racial profiling that nearly resulted in a presidential assassination attempt. That gives us leverage. Malcolm smiled slightly, reminded again why he had fallen in love with this brilliant woman 5 years ago. So we use that leverage to push for systemic changes in TSA training and accountability. Exactly, Zoe agreed. And we have evidence now. The security footage clearly shows the disparate treatment. My firm can file FOIA requests for Hammond's disciplinary history to establish the pattern. Malcolm winced as he shifted his bandaged arm. The physical reminder of today's danger grounded their theoretical discussion in very real stakes. "Whatever we decide," he said quietly, "I keep thinking about the next black doctor or lawyer who gets pulled aside while the actual threat walks through. We have a chance to change that pattern." Zoe squeezed his uninjured hand. "Then, let's use this moment. Meet with the president, accept the recognition, but make it clear that real change is the only acceptable outcome." They were interrupted by another knock at the door. Agent Foster entered with an urgent expression. "I thought you should know. The media presence outside the airport has grown exponentially. Someone leaked information about a foiled assassination attempt, and your names have surfaced online." Malcolm and Zoe looked at each other, recognizing that events were now moving beyond their control. The private decision they'd been deliberating had just become very public. "There's something else," Foster added. "We've completed preliminary review of airport security footage from the past month. Hammond has a clear pattern of disproportionately selecting travelers of color for random screening while expediting others through the process. This isn't an isolated incident." The confirmation of what they'd experienced as part of a larger pattern solidified their resolve. "We'll meet with the president," Malcolm decided. "But we're going to tell the full story, not the sanitized version." As Foster left to relay their decision, Zoe pulled out a legal pad from her purse, the one item security hadn't confiscated, and began outlining specific demands for TSA reform. Their anniversary vacation had transformed into something neither had anticipated, but their partnership had never felt stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as they had everything else in their marriage. And perhaps their ordeal might prevent others from experiencing the same discrimination that had nearly led to tragedy. The secure government facility hummed with increased activity as preparations for the presidential meeting accelerated. Malcolm and Zoe sat alone in the conference room, collecting their thoughts before what would likely be the most consequential conversation of their lives. "We need to be strategic about this," Zoe said, reviewing her handwritten notes. "The administration will want to focus exclusively on your heroism while minimizing the discrimination that preceded it. We can't let them separate those narratives." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully, memories from his life flashing before him. He remembered his father's pride when Malcolm had been accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School, but also his father's warnings about navigating predominantly white institutions. He recalled the first time he'd performed successful open-heart surgery, saving a child's life, only to have the child's grandmother ask when the real doctor would come to explain the procedure. "This isn't just about what happened to us today," Malcolm reflected. "It's about a lifetime of having to prove we belong in spaces where we've earned our place 10 times over." Zoe understood completely. As one of only 3 black female partners at her law firm, she'd fought similar battles throughout her career. Clients questioning her expertise, judges addressing male junior colleagues instead of her security guards following her through courthouse corridors, despite her professional attire. "We've each handled these situations individually throughout our careers," Zoe said. "But today, we have a chance to address the systemic issues." A soft knock interrupted their conversation as Eliza Thornton entered with Agent Cooper. "The president will arrive in approximately 15 minutes, Thornton informed them. He suggested a private conversation followed by a photo opportunity with no press. This allows him to express gratitude while maintaining security protocols around the sensitive nature of today's events." Miss Thornton, Zoe replied, her legal training evident in her precise tone. "We're prepared to meet with the president, but we want to be clear about our position. We believe the racial profiling we experienced is directly connected to the security failure that allowed the actual threat to proceed undetected." Thornton's politically trained expression revealed nothing, but Cooper nodded slightly. As a Secret Service agent, he recognized the security implications of focusing resources on the wrong targets. "The president is interested in hearing your perspective," Thornton assured them diplomatically. "We have something we'd like you to see before the meeting," Malcolm said, nodding to Agent Foster, who had just entered. Agent Foster has compiled security footage that demonstrates a pattern of discriminatory screening practices. Foster placed her tablet on the conference table, queuing up a compilation of footage showing Hammond's pattern of disproportionately targeting passengers of color over the past month while allowing others through expedited screening, with minimal attention. "This isn't about one bad officer or a single incident," Malcolm explained. "It's about a systemic failure that creates actual security risks when resources focus on bias rather than behavior." As the footage played, even Thornton's political polish couldn't mask her concern. The visual evidence was damning. Clear documentation of a pattern that contradicted the narrative Hammond and Pierce were attempting to construct in the media. "The president should see this," Cooper stated firmly. "Agent Cooper is right," Zoe added. "This isn't just a civil rights issue, though that would be reason enough for concern. It's a national security vulnerability when bias dictates who receives scrutiny." Thornton assessed the situation with the calculation of an experienced political operative. "I'll make sure the president reviews this footage before your meeting. But I should warn you, Airport Director Pierce is requesting to be included in the presidential meeting as well." Pierce is already rewriting the narrative to protect his department, Malcolm noted, frustration evident in his voice. He's positioning himself as part of the solution rather than acknowledging the problem. Another alert sounded on Foster's tablet. She checked it with a frown. "Pierce has called a press conference for later this afternoon. Based on the media advisory, he plans to present airport security as having worked cooperatively with you to identify the threat." "That's absolutely false," Zoe stated. "They detained us while dismissing Malcolm's concerns about Schultz." The door opened again as a junior agent entered. "The president has arrived at the facility and will be ready to meet in 5 minutes." As the others left to prepare for the presidential arrival, Malcolm and Zoe faced their decision point. They could accept the gratitude, take the photo, and allow the story to be shaped into a simple tale of heroism. Or they could risk political backlash by insisting on accountability alongside recognition. "Whatever we decide," Malcolm said quietly, taking Zoe's hand, "we decide together." Zoe squeezed his hand gently. "Remember when we were planning our wedding and my mother wanted that elaborate church ceremony with hundreds of guests?" Malcolm smiled at the seemingly random memory. "And we decided on the small garden ceremony instead, even though it disappointed her. Because we knew what was right for us, regardless of external pressure." Zoe finished. "This is no different. We stay true to our values and use this platform to create meaningful change." Malcolm's expression grew determined. "Then we tell the full story, not the sanitized version. We accept the recognition but insist on accountability." As they stood to prepare for the presidential meeting, Malcolm winced slightly from his injured arm. The physical reminder of what he'd risked brought clarity to their decision. This wasn't about politics or optics. It was about preventing the next incident where bias might have even deadlier consequences. A series of sharp knocks announced the imminent arrival of the presidential entourage. Malcolm and Zoe Washington straightened their posture, professionals accustomed to high-pressure situations. What had begun as their anniversary trip had transformed into an unexpected platform for addressing systemic injustice. They were as prepared as they could be for a meeting neither had anticipated when they'd packed their suitcases for Barbados that morning. Whatever the outcome, they would face it together as they had everything else in their 5 years of marriage. The door opened, and history waited on the other side. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Malcolm and Zoe Washington's Buckhead home, casting golden light across their living room as they prepared for a day neither had anticipated a year ago. "Are you nervous?" Zoe asked, adjusting Malcolm's tie. The same navy silk tie he'd worn on that fateful day at Atlanta International Airport. "A little," Malcolm admitted with a smile. "Public speaking was never my specialty. I'm more comfortable with unconscious patients." Zoe laughed, a sound light and genuine. "Well, the TSA Accountability Board isn't likely to fall asleep during your address, unlike your patients." So much had changed in the 12 months since their interrupted anniversary trip. Their private meeting with the president had lasted nearly an hour, extending well beyond the scheduled 15 minutes. With the evidence Foster had compiled and their first-hand account of the discrimination they'd experienced, they had made a compelling case for structural reform rather than symbolic recognition. The president, recognizing both the moral imperative and the security implications, had directed his administration to launch a comprehensive review of TSA screening protocols nationwide. The photo opportunity that followed had included not just handshakes, but a substantive announcement of the forthcoming accountability measures. Airport Director Pierce's planned press conference had been abruptly canceled. 2 weeks later, after an expedited investigation, both Hammond and Peterson had been suspended pending disciplinary review. The security footage compiled by Foster had made their pattern of discriminatory screening impossible to deny. But Malcolm and Zoe hadn't stopped there. Using their unexpected platform and Zoe's legal expertise, they had established the Washington Foundation for Equal Justice, focused specifically on addressing discrimination in public institutions. What began as a response to their personal experience had evolved into a national movement for accountability in security systems. "The car will be here in 15 minutes, Malcolm noted, checking his watch. A new one, as his previous watch had been damaged during the struggle with Schultz. "Plenty of time," Zoe assured him, gathering her briefing materials for the day's ceremony. Today marked the official implementation of the reformed TSA training and accountability measures they had helped design. Malcolm would be addressing the inaugural class of TSA supervisors who had completed the enhanced bias training program, while Zoe would be presenting the legal framework for the new accountability standards. Their phones chimed simultaneously. A news alert about Gregory Schultz's sentencing the previous day. His connections to a domestic terror cell had led to multiple convictions and the disruption of several planned attacks. The judicial system had worked as intended, though the memory of that day still occasionally gave Malcolm nightmares. Ready to change airport security forever? Zoe asked, her pride in their journey evident. "As long as you're by my side," Malcolm replied, kissing her gently. The drive to Atlanta International Airport felt surreal. A year ago, they had made this same journey with such different expectations. A romantic getaway to celebrate 5 years of marriage. Instead, they had embarked on a different kind of journey together, one neither had anticipated but both recognized as necessary. As their car approached the airport, Malcolm noticed the new signage, "Atlanta International Airport Security Through Equity," part of the rebranding initiative that had accompanied the substantive reforms. The terminal looked different too, with visible changes to the security checkpoint layout. Gone were the isolated screening rooms that had facilitated discriminatory practices. The new design emphasized transparency, with clear sight lines and recording systems that protected both passengers and officers. They were greeted at the staff entrance by a familiar face, Officer Thomas Reed, the airport police officer who had initially dismissed Malcolm's concerns about Schultz. Reed had undergone a transformation of his own over the past year, becoming one of the most vocal advocates for the reformed training program. Dr. and Mrs. Washington Reed greeted them with genuine respect. "The board members are assembled in the conference center. We've got a full house today." As they walked through the terminal toward the conference center, Malcolm spotted another familiar face. Layla Johnson, the young black traveler who had witnessed their detention and offered help. She now wore the insignia of the newly established TSA Supervisory Board, a civilian oversight committee that reviewed screening practices for potential bias. Miss Johnson Zoe greeted her warmly. "I'm glad you could be here today." "I wouldn't miss it," Johnson replied. "Your foundation's fellowship program made this career transition possible." The conference center doors opened to reveal a diverse group of TSA officers and supervisors, airport security personnel, and government officials. At the podium, the new airport director, a woman whose appointment had been one of the first concrete changes following the incident, welcomed Malcolm and Zoe to the stage. "Today, we implement reforms that are long overdue," the director began. "And we do so thanks to the courage and persistence of 2 individuals who transformed a personal injustice into systemic change." As Malcolm took his place at the podium, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The discrimination they had faced was not unique. Countless travelers had endured similar treatment without the platform or resources to challenge it. What made their story different was not the injustice itself, but the opportunity they'd had to address its root causes. 1 year ago, my wife and I stood in this airport subjected to discriminatory screening while an actual security threat walked through unchallenged. Malcolm began. Today we return not as victims of that system, but as architects of its transformation. The audience listened intently as Malcolm outlined the reformed protocols, behavior-based screening criteria, transparent documentation requirements, and accountability mechanisms that protected both passengers and officers. When Zoe joined him at the podium to present the legal framework, her professional expertise shone through. The new system included clear guidelines for passenger rights officer responsibilities and data collection to identify and address potential patterns of bias. After the formal presentation concluded, Reed approached them privately. "There's something I'd like to show you before you leave," he said, leading them toward the main terminal. At the security checkpoint, a new training center had been established adjacent to the screening area. Inside, officers reviewed footage of actual screening interactions, analyzing them for potential bias and security effectiveness. "We call it the Washington Protocol," Reed explained. Every officer now receives ongoing training using real-world scenarios to identify when bias might be influencing security decisions. Malcolm and Zoe exchanged glances, moved by the unexpected tribute. What had begun as their personal ordeal had evolved into a methodology that would protect countless future travelers. As they prepared to leave, Malcolm noticed the departure board, a direct flight to Bridgetown, Barbados, scheduled for later that afternoon. The same flight they had missed a year earlier. "You know," Malcolm said to Zoe with a smile, "we never did take that anniversary trip." Zoe looked from Malcolm to the departure board, then back again. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "Our bags are still packed from last year," Malcolm pointed out, "and I believe the airline owes us first-class tickets." 3 hours later, Malcolm and Zoe Washington passed through the reformed security checkpoint, experiencing the new protocols firsthand. The screening was thorough, but respectful, based on behavior rather than bias. Officers maintained professional courtesy while following clear guidelines for passenger interaction. As they settled into their first-class seats, Zoe took Malcolm's hand. "Not exactly how we planned to celebrate our anniversary, but somehow appropriate." Malcolm smiled, thinking of all they had accomplished in the past year. What had begun as discrimination had transformed into opportunity, not just for them, but for every traveler who would benefit from the reformed system. "To new beginnings," Malcolm said, raising his complimentary champagne glass. "And to 5 years that changed more than just our lives," Zoe added, touching her glass to his. As the plane lifted off, carrying them finally toward the anniversary celebration they'd planned a year earlier, both recognized that their unexpected journey had led to something far more meaningful than a vacation. They had transformed a moment of injustice into lasting change, proof that sometimes the most important destinations aren't found on any flight schedule. This powerful story reminds us that systemic discrimination doesn't just harm individuals, it creates dangerous security vulnerabilities by focusing resources on bias rather than actual threats. Malcolm and Zoe's experience demonstrates how racial profiling can simultaneously humiliate innocent travelers while allowing real dangers to pass undetected. Their journey teaches us that accountability requires both courage and evidence, as change rarely comes without documentation and persistence. We learn that addressing discrimination isn't just about individual incidents, but reforming entire systems. The Washingtons could have accepted private recognition while allowing the narrative to be rewritten, but they chose the harder path of demanding structural change. Their foundation transformed a personal injustice into a movement that protects countless future travelers. Perhaps most importantly, this story shows us that speaking truth to power, even when faced with institutional resistance, can create lasting impact. When we stand firmly in our dignity and refuse to allow discrimination to be normalized, we create opportunities for transformation that extend far beyond our personal experience. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but felt afraid to speak up? What gave you the courage to stand against injustice in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might inspire others to find their voice. If this account of courage in the face of racial profiling moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up for what's right. Thank you for joining us today. Remember, true security can only exist when justice and dignity are extended to everyone, regardless of race, religion, or background.